Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon. Today we've got a few things to get into, but before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Orlando Magic podcasts here on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And let's get right into today's episode. So today is going to be relatively rapid fire because we are approaching the very last NBA preseason game for the Magic. Of course, if you are seeing this episode on Thursday, the Orlando Magic play later on tonight. If you are seeing this episode later on in the day or on Friday, the Orlando Magic will have already played. We will have seen 4 games in the books, and we will have to wait until I believe it's next Wednesday, either next Wednesday or next Thursday. I believe it's next Wednesday to see the Orlando Magic back in action again. So today is going to be a rapid fire episode, just giving a couple thoughts on some of the things that have been heard since the third preseason game over the weekend to kind of help put our final bow on this team's preseason. And then tomorrow's episode will be a reflection of the last preseason game and some thoughts of the preseason as a whole in terms of what I felt like I saw players do well, what I think could still be improved, and what I think some of the goals going into the actual NBA season are. I think those are going to be kind of the main topics of tomorrow's episode. And then when we get to Monday and Tuesday, I'll put a bow on that by giving you some final remarks as well as some key updated news by then, hopefully, because there will be, a couple more days in between to get updates on guys like Jalen Suggs and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the layout for the next couple of episodes before we officially get to NBA tip-off. And then we're on game 1 of 82 in the regular season. But today, we're going to talk about, first, what Jonathan Isaac said about the Orlando Magic's depth. What he said in camp earlier this week was there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. There's going to be a little bit of a learning curve with new guys integrated into the team, especially with that starting unit. They're going to have to figure out how to mesh and play together, but we have the ability to have guys come off the bench and play well. That's what stood out to me this preseason. We have a lot of depth on this team, and it will be a good year for us. I think that the most important thing when you hear Jonathan Isaac speak on the depth of this team, particularly when you see the way this preseason has been played, you've seen a lot more minutes from guys mainly that are in an interesting spot in terms of trying to carve out a role for themselves, right? Jace Richardson and Jet Howard particularly are in a bit of a position battle, right? And everybody loves themselves a good position battle from a storyline perspective, but the reality of the situation is also a good developmental plot point for a team. You get to see just how strong your quote-unquote weakest link is, not indicating that Jet Howard necessarily is the weakest link of the team. You could argue that actually the weakest link at the moment is the guy making the comment, Jonathan Isaac, who right now, despite being such a good defender, can only play about 15 minutes a game. That's neither here nor there. What I'm saying for that is it's interesting that he used the word deep because I think a lot of people come into this season looking at the Orlando Magic and still viewing them as, or not still viewing, but mainly view them as top heavy. I think a lot of people would look at the Orlando Magic's starting 5. You have Paulo Banchero, Desmond Bain, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Wendell Carter Jr., and you say like, okay, that's easily a top 5, top 7 starting 5 unit from a talent perspective in the NBA. But then once you get to the bench, there's questions about Anthony Black as a shooter, even though we know he's a high level defender. Jace Richardson's a rookie. There's always going to be questions about the ebbs and flows of a rookie season. Jet Howard, the first 2 years of his career, can barely get on the floor, but in the preseason, he's putting the ball on the floor. He's making good decisions. He's hitting 50% of his three-point shots through the preseason. I think he's 7 of 14. Right? You see those developments. Goga Batase's development through Eurobasket. Tristan da Silva's development through Eurobasket. What does Goga look like coming out of Eurobasket? What does Tristan da Silva look like in year 2 with hopefully an expanded role off the bench? There's all these questions around the depth in a way that says like, oh, this team actually can be a lot better. So despite the fact that a lot of people look at this team on the surface for what their starting 5's talent is, this team is it's almost like Jamal Mosley has put a lot of emphasis on trying to highlight these positional battles and also in a sense trying to put more emphasis on the depth as opposed to acclimating this starting lineup. Because as Jonathan Isaac mentions, Desmond Bain is a interesting piece to have to integrate into this roster, not just because of the talent, but because of the fact that his skill set is very different from any other shooting guard that's played next to Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner thus far in their careers. You put that in conjunction with the fact that this is a team that's expected to have a high level offense this year, and now they have the pressure of needing to gel in a sense. They have that even further pressure, or even more pressure, I guess you could say, to gel that much more because Desmond Bain's the missing piece and all these other things. I actually think it's going to be the depth that is the most important factor of this team. Not Desmond, not does Paulo Banchero take a MVP leap, not do we see another gear from Franz Wagner, despite the fact that I think all of those things are very important. I actually believe the most important thing for this team are the quote unquote X Factor guys. Does Anthony Black discover a 3 point shot, or at least does the aggressiveness that he showed through the preseason translate to the regular season where he's much more dangerous as an on ball threat? Jed Howard, does his minutes on the floor become more valuable now? Same thing with Jace Richardson. Can he be a valuable contributor year one as a 3 point shooter and a floor spacer across the board? Those are the big questions. I think the depth of this team ends up being the most important storyline. If these guys, I think the Magic can have a top. When Mo Wagner was healthy, once upon a time, they had a top four scoring bench in the NBA. Mo Wagner, who we're going to talk about in a second, obviously is not. But I think this bench is much improved beyond the fact that Mo Wagner will probably not start the season out healthy. I think if this team can return to being a top five caliber, or return to having a top five caliber bench, that could mean so much for this team. And I know that's hypothetical, but I also think that this team has the kind of depth to be able to do so. So I agree with Jonathan. I also believe that the depth is not just a underlying point for this team. I think it might end up being the most important point for this team very, very soon. Next up, let's actually talk about somebody on that bench, Mo Wagner, who we got a most recent update on. I think one that should um, make Magic fans feel a lot better about potentially seeing Mo Wagner sometime this season, and more particularly, at least knowing that he's still being impactful, even on the bench. And this comes from Jamal Mosley, where it says Mo's progressing. He's progressing well. He's doing a lot of individual work, non-contact work, but his spirits are great. He's done a great job of using his voice with his team, as well as still continuing to be a leader the way we need him to be, even though he's not playing right now. And again, as I mentioned beforehand, this is another aspect of the bench depth for this team being so impactful. Mo Wagner, again, as I mentioned beforehand, once upon a time before his injury, this Orlando Magic team had a top four scoring bench in the NBA. And last year, they pretty much had the exact same players as they do right now. The only real additions to that bench are Tyus Jones, who I think is going to be a big time veteran presence and actually help settle that offense down even more, whether it's the bench unit or even contributing as a guy who can kind of make things a little easier on starting lineups as well, maybe in place of someone like Jalen Suggs, who might end up playing on a pitch count to start the year off. Mo Wagner's voice is very important. He's an energetic guy. He's very influential in terms of what he's able to do on the floor, not necessarily from the impact metrics. You're never going to see Mo Wagner stacking the stats or stuffing the stat sheet, but he is a guy who I think his energy and effort level permeates throughout the team. And I think that's really influential for this team, particularly because something I've said so much throughout this summer, and I'll keep reiterating it throughout the regular season, it's going to be beating a dead horse, but it's going to be through this idea of helping fans understand how important uh realizing the moment is for a young team like this, right? And understanding to still be hungry despite the fact that you're being anointed as a potential MVP candidate if you're Paulo Banchero, or looking towards your first potential All-Star selection if you're Franz Wagner. Same thing for Desmond Bain in terms of being able to possibly be selected for a first-time All-Star slot now that he's in the Eastern Conference. You're being anointed as a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. All of these things can easily make a team lose their hunger. Paulo Banchero just signed a 5-year max extension this past summer. Desmond Bain was traded, the paid the The package that Desmond Bain was traded for was the equivalent of something you would move for a multi-time All-Star player, right? All of these things can get to your head if you allow them. I think a player like Mo Wagner, who's kind of built his career off of being a gritty, dirty work, high energy player, being vocal and being active within the Orlando Magic brass, despite the fact that he's injured, I think can mean so much for this Orlando Magic team because it helps with keeping them grounded. I think that's also what helps so much with the Orlando Magic bringing in a player like Tyus Jones as a veteran presence. Like those individuals, those kind of voices, even Desmond Bain to a lesser degree, somebody who's tasted postseason success before, right? Those kind of voices in the room can help stabilize a young locker room who's seen themselves slowly but surely ascending. And I think that's very important when you're talking about trying to build not only a culture but trying to build a perennial championship caliber team. So, shout out to Mo Wagner. Hope we see him very, very soon. And a guy that I think that even if we don't see him very much this season, we are going to hear about his impact a great deal, and just in a multitude of different ways. Next up, let's actually talk about Desmond Bain. Jonathan Isaac had some more to say about him, where I thought it was really interesting. Obviously, the preseason is not the greatest litmus test for any real translation to the regular season outside of very nuanced details. But this is what Jonathan Isaac had said about Desmond Bain. He said, we haven't even seen, especially during the preseason, Desmond Bain scratched the surface of the player that he is. Where he was here when he was here through the summer, we were able to play. Even today, getting up and down the floor, he's a phenomenal player, phenomenal IQ. He can really shoot. He can really, really shoot, and I know that's going to continue to come out as the season goes on. But his ability to soak up attention from a defense, we have so many guys on the floor at one time where a defense on another team would be focused all on that one guy. But now we have 3 or 4 guys on the team where they have to do something specific against him and specific against him and specific to him. Oh, against him, specific against him, and specific to him that makes him tough. So I think that's very important, right? I think the biggest thing when you think about Desmond Bain and his translation to the Orlando Magic team as compared to the Memphis Grizzlies is it was very definitive that as a perimeter player with ball handling ability that Desmond Bain was easily the second best player and it wasn't close, right? Jaren Jackson Jr. was their second best player on the team. You can make arguments on some nights that Jaren Jackson Jr. was their most effective player, even. But Desmond Bain, as a perimeter ball handler, was easily the second best player. Now, when you play on a team where your 2 best players are jumbo wings, there's a hierarchy where now Desmond Bain may be the third best perimeter ball handler as far as attention grabbing is concerned in terms of the attention grabbing of the defense, right? Because you have to pay Paulo Banchero mind because he's a high level passer at the power forward position. You have to pay someone like Franz Wagner mind because he's somebody that can be very dangerous with the ball in his hands as a guy that is powerful as a driver. When he's aggressive, makes good decisions around the rim, and we've already seen in preseason that he's getting better at being able to draw a contract and finishing around the rim. So Desmond Bain gets slotted into maybe like the third spot, and don't even forget about the fact that again Jalen Suggs is the lead point guard on this team and can be a knockdown perimeter threat because he shoots nearly 40% from beyond the arc and has to be respected. Now, granted, we need a little bit more sample size on that, but as of the last time Jalen Suggs was healthy, he put together a strong season and a half of being a 38% three-point shooter, and if that's still if that's still consistent, and that's gonna be another element that has to be respected. So if Desmond Bain is now the tertiary ball handler, he's seeing an even different version of the defense that he even saw playing next to John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. in Memphis. And that puts him in such a unique situation because, as Jonathan said, there's a situation where Desmond could be even more lethal on ball as like a microwave scorer type in the starting lineup than we ever got to see in Memphis, because he never necessarily, because in Memphis when, especially with John Morant out, he was like the guy. He was the guy on the perimeter. All the decision making, playmaking, um, all of the offensive initiation, it all ended up falling on him, and he became a number one option essentially on the perimeter for that team. Now, when you get bumped back to number three, but you have that on ball skill, and now you have to go. Now you go against the opposing team's second or third best perimeter defender again, because again, Franz Wagner, Paulo Banchero have to be respected. Jalen Suggs has to be respected as a shooter. Now, Desmond Bane is an offensive generator. He can play a much more aggressive offensive role because now he's just being asked to come out, be aggressive, and shoot around two guys that already know how to initiate offense at a high level. That changes so much for this Orlando Magic team. And I think it also changes a lot for him because it puts him on a trajectory now where he can show so much more on ball skill, because he's not tasked with having to run an offense, having to keep an offense organized. His role is to come in, floor space, and shot generate. He essentially is the starting lineup version of what we saw from Malik Monk last year, or a starting representation would be someone like what Tyler Hero has been, but more particularly blossomed into the best version of last season with the Miami Heat, where he made the All-Star game. Like those are the better representations of what I think what a guy like Desmond Bane can be, and I actually think he can be better from a talent perspective than guys like Malik Monk and Tyler Hero, because I think he has a defensive edge to him that those two guys don't have. So I agree with Isaac. I feel like we're at a point with Desmond Bane where I feel like even if you turn on the tape from Memphis, there's still another gear for Desmond that we just haven't seen yet. We're not going to see it in the preseason. I think we're honestly not going to see it until we're about 20, 25 games in, until we start to really see glimpses of like, oh snap, Desmond Bane has some on ball chops that even the Memphis Grizzlies didn't see coming. There's going to be a night where he drops like 35, 40, and he just was on an absolute heater, and it felt like he just could not miss, and he was doing it on all three facets of the game, getting to the rim, finishing beyond the arc, as a three-point shooter at high clip, mid-range game on point, and he's just gonna put together a complete masterclass a couple times throughout the season. A 28 ball here, a 35 ball there, a 40 ball at the top of the year. It's gonna be a couple of performances that are gonna be like, oh snap, that's right. We acquired this guy to come in and be a offensive engine on the perimeter for us, and he's actualizing that. I think it's gonna take a couple of games, a couple of weeks to get to that point, but I think Desmond Bane is more than capable. Last but not least, I thought this was just an interesting little like nugget of information I found online from the Ringer. They do this thing every year called the NBA Clarity Index, and the NBA Clarity Index is essentially this take on every team's vision slash direction coming into the year, and they put them in tiers based off of how clear that direction feels for them. There's some that are very confused and kind of driving in the dark and have no idea what their franchise is trying to build ahead. You have other teams where they're very clear on what they want. They are championship contenders. They are win now teams. They are a tanking team. Very clear that they are a a tanking and rebuilding team, right? Now, clarity doesn't necessarily always have to mean that you're aiming for a championship, because not every team has a clear path to positioning themselves to be a championship caliber team. Sometimes clarity is just understanding that this is not your year, but there's particular building blocks that can be uh, put together in a certain season to put you in position to, eventually being that kind of squad. And I thought it was interesting. The Orlando Magic were placed in the very top tier of this list, and it was kind of an interesting feat because the Desmond Bain trade was kind of the butt, not the butt of the joke, but the Desmond Bain trade was the linchpin of it. So as much as people were very critical of the actual package that was given for for Desmond Bain, the Desmond Bain trade itself was a good representation or a strong representation that the Orlando Magic are clear on one thing. They are a contention type team. They are a team that believes they are a Eastern Conference powerhouse. They believe that they can be a perennial playoff team, and they are a team that believes that with a move like Desmond Bain and bringing in Tyus Jones, that they can take that next step to being a championship caliber squad. And I've said this throughout the entirety of the summer. And shout out to the new listeners that are going to be hearing this for the first time. But this has been my philosophy around the Orlando Magic the entire time, dating back to the Desmond Bain trade, which hilariously was actually one of the first episodes that I did, was kind of reacting to the Desmond Bain trade because it was one of the first acquisitions of the summer. And not only is that a sign of aggressiveness that tells you like we believe we're in a particular spot as a franchise, but I think the Orlando Magic, if you look at everything they've been able to do, dating back to the Desmond Bain trade, they have positioned themselves to fully understand and actualize what it is like to build a playoff contender from the ground up. They have built a young, rangy wing roster where everybody is 6'5" and higher, uh, positive wingspans, defensive acumen, good ball handling, good decision making with the basketball in their hands for the most part. Their biggest flaw has just been the 3-point shooting, right? And this team is in a really interesting spot because what I believe this year is so the reason why I believe this year is so important is because with teams like the Indiana Pacers and the Philadelphia 76ers and the Boston Celtics having so many questions around them and the state of their roster, particularly just for this season, it gives you a good opportunity as the Orlando Magic to identify. It gives you as the Orlando Magic a good identifier as to where you really stack up amongst the rest of the Eastern Conference. Because if you can't be a top three seed in this version of the East, your chances of being a top three seed in the Eastern Conference when those teams kind of get their ish back together, so to speak, it's much more difficult. So this is an important season for the Orlando Magic to really figure out where they stack up, not just in the East, but overall as a playoff and championship caliber contender. So having this level of clarity is one of the first leaping points to becoming that. And I think you have to commend what the Orlando Magic are building. I think the Orlando Magic are still one more move away from really putting themselves in the position that they want to be in. And I think that it's not a surprise that guys like Jonathan Isaac's name have come up so much throughout the summer. Guys like Jet Howard as well, who's looking for a contract extension. I'm not surprised that those guys' names are popping up the way they are because I still feel like if this Orlando Magic team believes they're a championship caliber squad, that there is one more just like consolidation move, and I hate saying that after praising this Magic bench so much, but I do feel like there is one consolidation move, so to speak, where we maybe have a handful of guys that are all fighting for redundant positional value, particularly at that guard spot with Jace Richardson, Chet Howard, um, to a lesser degree, Anthony Black and Tyus Jones, even though I feel like those two guys are pretty solidified. I think Jace Richardson is safe. I think Chet Howard is in a really interesting spot. I look at this team and I feel like they know what their agenda is, and I'm interested to see whether or not they feel they are already set to actualize that, or if they agree that there is one more move to really be made. So we'll just have to see. But with all that being said, in the comment section down below, my question of the day to you guys is: What do you believe the who do you believe the most important player of the starting five is this upcoming season? And not the most talented, because I feel like that answer is very clear, right? That answer is actually very straightforward. I think the biggest question for me is, who do you think is the most important player out of the starting five in terms of what we need to see from this upcoming season? Is it that we just have to see an MVP caliber season from Paulo Beccaro? Is there something that we have to see from Franz Wagner this upcoming season? in order for us to fully believe in him as an all-star caliber player? Is it just is Desmond Bain so important because we traded so much draft capital for you that like you have to bring to the table what it is we moved for you? Jalen Suggs is very important to this team for what he brings as a defender and as a floor spacer in the starting lineup. But Wendell Carter Jr., I think, is also probably the weakest link from a talent perspective in the starting five if Jalen Suggs is healthy. So what happens if he improves? Right? These all five of these guys serve a very important role in the progression of this team this upcoming season. But who do you think is the most important in terms of what we have to see from them this year in order for this team to be a real championship contender? With that all being said, this has been another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, hit that post notification bell so you know we're always dropping new videos. I will see you guys tomorrow after the last preseason game of the NBA preseason. But until then, peace.